Good morning. Today we look at Exodus 23 and 24. And, we've been expanding the laws, the Ten Commandments. We've received those and other laws. And chapter 23 begins with talking about justice and being honorable in in everything. You shall not spread a false report, no gossiping. You shall not join hands with the wicked to act as a malicious witness. You shall not follow a majority in wrongdoing. Just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean that you should do it too if it's wrong. You shall not side with the majority to pervert justice, nor shall you be partial to a poor person in a lawsuit. And in Acts 10, Paul says, "Indeed, I understand that God shows no partiality." And that's what God would have us do as well. So he's talking about, not being partial, but being honorable, having integrity, and making sure justice is done. Our Old Testament reading for this coming Sunday is from Micah chapter 6. And the last verse we read is chapter 6, verse 8. God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly before your God. To do justice. And this is such an important thing, to do the right thing. And it's not always easy to do the right thing because there's a lot of peer pressure sometimes to do the wrong thing. And we hear conflicting reports so often. But it's, to do justice and to live honorably. And so many people don't understand that, living honorably. It's, if I can get away with it, I'm going to get away with it. And that's not at all what God would have us believe or think or do. So he's talking about, social justice. And then verse 4, when you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey going astray, bring it back. Don't just say, oh, that's what he deserves. No, but bring it back. And he says, if you see the donkey of one who hates you being unfairly burdened, speak up, and it's not just a donkey, but if you see something unfair going on, if speak up, and see that justice is done, see that things are treated with honor and integrity. And if we could do that, if people had that sense of honesty and integrity and common sense, which we talk about, not being so common anymore either. There's just so many things in the world that God knows what's going to go on. He knows what has happened and he knows what's going to happen. And so he's establishing these laws. And in Jeremiah 31, he says that I will write my law upon your heart, and a new covenant and all of that. So, we know what's right and what's wrong, but society has got stuff so perverted that we have blinders on. And so God keeps calling us back to that. Verse 6, he says, you shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in their lawsuits. Keep far from a false charge. Don't kill the innocent and those in the right. I won't acquit that, and so it's to do this social justice. And that verse, Micah 6:8, that I quoted, what does God expect or require of you? To do justice, and to live honorably with God. That's the Bible verse that Jimmy Carter, President of the United States, had his Bible open and his hand on as he was inaugurated. And I'm going to mention that again on Sunday morning at worship. But, it's, if we could seek justice and live honorably with God, and do that, it would be so good, And in verse 9, you shall not oppress a resident alien, for you know the heart of an alien. For you were aliens in Egypt for 400 years, You know what it's like to be the outsider. So, to be welcoming, to be gracious, and all of that. And then verse 10 starts, be good stewards of the land. For 6 years you shall plant your crops and harvest your crops. And on the 7th year you shall let that land rest, lie and fallow. And back in 80s and 90s, well, starting in the 70s, it was kind of a requirement of the government here in the United States for farmers to have summer fallow, to let some of the land rest every year, for the government programs and everything. And it wasn't just for that, but it was good for the land. I mean, and today we don't see as much of that. I mean, we just keep pouring, nutrients into the ground, and rather than, sometimes when the summer fallow, the crops, the ground would be able to be rejuvenated somewhat, on its own. Lightning builds the nitrogen in the soil, when it strikes again. And, so many things of nature that we kind of forget, in taking care, and just, let your land rest on the seventh year. I mean, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. That's 6 days you shall work. And it all comes back down to that creation. God created the heavens and the earth and all that is in it in 6 days, and he rested on the seventh. God knows how important it is for us to rest. A friend of mine just this morning said, I think I'm caught up on sleep now. Well, that's a great thing. I mean, our bodies need that. Our bodies need rest, and we run and we push, and I know sometimes we just don't sleep well either, but we need that rest and rejuvenation. So verse 12, 6 days you shall do your work, on the seventh you will rest, and so shall your ox and your donkey. And, so it's not to hire somebody else to keep everything going on that seventh day. And then, but that's the way it is. And, and that was when labor laws came into existence. People were required to work, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so, hey, we gotta protect the people. We gotta give them rights. We gotta have them rest. And, so now, here our 40-hour week is kind of normal. And sometimes you work, maybe you work 4 10s, so you get your, but it's to have that time of rest and all of that. And then in verse 14, 3 times out of the year you shall have festivals to me. The first one, of course, is the Passover, the Passover meal. And then there's the first fruits, and then the culmination of the harvest, and so the first fruits and what's the other one called? First fruits of your labor, and then the festival of ingathering at the end of the year. And so the first fruits and the festival of ingathering, kind of sounds similar, but the first fruits is, when you first begin to reap your crops and to bring them in. And, the festivals to the Lord and the sacrifices to the Lord are talked about. And it talks about, verse 20, I'm going to send an angel in front of you to guard you on the way. And so here's God's promise to these Israelites who have been set free for 3 months now, roughly, that, he's going to lead them and guide them. In chapter 24, we find Moses being called up onto the mountain again by God. God says, come to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel. So here God's calling those that Moses appointed as helpers, according to what his father-in-law Jethro told him. So God is calling the people to come, and he builds an altar at the foot of the mountain, setting up the 12 pillars, and Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders go up, and it says they saw the God of Israel. And then in verse 12, the Lord calls Moses up on the mountain, and wait there, and I'll give you tablets of stone. So here's now when he creates the 10 commandments on the stone tablets. I mean, he spoke them to Moses earlier, and now he's going to write them on the stone tablets. And so Moses sets out with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. And he says to the elders, wait here until we come to you again, for Aaron and Hur are with you. So Aaron and Hur remain there to be the leaders of the people, to encourage them. And Moses goes up on the mountain, and the cloud covers the mountain, and the glory of the Lord, it says, was there for 6 days, and Moses was on that mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. And again, reminding us of the rains for 40 days and 40 nights. The rains came down, and And the 40 days and 40 nights are going to translate into the 40 years in the wilderness. And again, these numbers in the Bible that have different meanings and of completeness. But through it all, God is leading, encouraging, and inviting the people to live lives of justice and integrity, honesty, be upright, and take care of the creation that God has given them.